Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason. I'm a guy who's extremely vague about money.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And we have Pete here today.
Hey guys, I'm Pete. I'm an addict, and I love money, and I love finances.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about financial health today, which I think is a topic in recovery that we never, ever talk about, honestly. I don't remember in detox ever encountering any financial planning advice. I don't remember that in early recovery. In fact, I think we've kind of talked about in our traditions, 12-step programs almost suggest that the less money we have, the better off we are in a way in our traditions. And I've found that completely fascinating. And it's not a wonder that none of us become rich because of that suggestion.
And of course, as an addict, it's like drugs, money, and sex.
Right.
That's the trifecta of a happy life.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
So just before we get started, did want to thank Sarah and Julie for their continued contributions. And maybe you guys don't want to listen to the financial health episode because they might suggest you don't donate to...
Stop giving your money to us.
Right. Don't donate to shitty podcasts. That's dumb. So yeah, don't take what we say today too seriously if you are helping us out. But let's hop into our financial health topic. So Pete, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're here today?
Sure. Well, as an addict, I want to give back. I want to give back to the community and help as many people as I can. I've got a really busy life. I've got a young child. I've got, a full-time job, got a house, work in a program of recovery, work in a program of recovering from chronic pain as well. And, if I can get an opportunity to give back and help some people, I'd love to do it.
That's so interesting that you said you have a little kid, and the first thing I think of is I want to say congratulations, right? Because that seems appropriate. And I'm like, congratulations, you had sex? Like, what is that congratulations that comes up when people say that?
Right.
It's like when people, we were somewhere yesterday, and I have a 2-year-old, and they're like, oh, she's so adorable. And like, the natural thing is to say thank you, but I'm like, I didn't do nothing to make that. Like, it just happened. I didn't. Am I taking credit? Right.
Yep.
So when we're talking about financial health, I think the interesting part for people that come into recovery, we are probably in some of the worst financial shape of anybody out there, I would imagine. Like, okay, so you're talking about the crackhead, right? Like, and I'm not talking about any crackhead. Me, right? I smoked crack. I shot coke. Like, I did not have money at the end of my using. I could not get money from anybody personally, much less a private loan or anything. I was in debt. If anybody had ever given me a credit card, I had found out the passcode to get the money off of that credit card and overextended it. Or when it stopped letting me do that, I was like buying cartons of cigarettes and selling them half price with it, right? Like, I was just wrecking my credit. I was wrecking everything about finances. And Billy kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago before we started recording. Like, I had been exposed to the idea of having a bank account, investing money a little tiny bit. That wasn't really something. We weren't rich growing up. Like, we weren't investors, right? We just had a couple of dollars to throw into a CD or something.
Sure.
But some of these concepts were familiar to me. But like Billy said, I've run into quite a few people who their home life and upbringing, no, they've never heard of a bank account. They might not have a license or an ID or a social security card. So maybe why do we always avoid this conversation about money? And two, where do we even start?
Sure. So, for your first question, why do we avoid it? It's because money is uncomfortable, and it's kind of like talking about sex, either you love to have sex and you talk about it, or you're just kind of like, that's something I want to keep to myself. I know a lot of people that are very open about their finances, and to me, I'm kind of like, I'm not the type of person that wants to put my financial situation out there. So, to get started in life, as you come into recovery, and we were talking about this before we started as well. If you're in a recovery house or a halfway house and you've gotten a job, your first step really just needs to be start saving that money, because when you get out on your own, you're going to need to have a cushion. You don't need to have 6 or 8 months of expenses as you're starting out, but you need to get in your mind, you need to make a budget, and you can write it down, or which I would recommend writing it down. Or if you have it in your head, at least, I have this much money coming in each month. I know my rent is this. I know my phone bill is going to be this. You need to have those expenses covered. And before you can talk about savings and before you can talk about investing, you need to have a really good understanding of your ins and outs in that budget. And what do I have a buffer for? Do I have $50 a paycheck that I can put into a savings account? What are my short-term saving goals? Do I want to get a vehicle? Which, as we also talked about, I don't think that should be your top priority. If you're able to have that job and work it without a vehicle, then that is an expense that you don't need right away.
That's interesting, because I feel like one of the reasons, or at least the justifications that's always given for getting a vehicle is that gives me access to get better jobs.
It does. But I think as you're starting out, that, you have to take it with baby steps. With that movie, What About Bob? It's all baby steps, man. One step at a time. And the first thing you need to do, I would think the first thing that I would want would be a roof over my head. Get that apartment, make sure that you're covering your rent each month so you don't get evicted, and have that expense. If you look at your finances either on a weekly basis, if you get paid weekly or bi-weekly, take it to the month, multiply it out by 2 or 4 and say, okay, at the end of the month, I'm making $2,000 in cash. That's what I'm bringing home. My rent's $500. My phone bill is $150. So that gives you what, $1,350 left. And you have food, electricity, water, all those bills. You have to incorporate all of those. And then what you have left at the end of the month, that is what you can start either saving or putting towards, your next big expense that you want to purchase.
I noticed you didn't mention any allowance in there.
Well, no. So, but that's a really good point. I mean, obviously you have to have some spending money. You know that you're going to go out after meetings. You're going to meet friends for coffee. So yeah, give yourself a couple $100 or $100 a paycheck, whatever it is. But you got to stick to it too. It takes discipline, and it's I know that that's not easy, and that's a terrible word for an addict. But when you come into recovery, I mean, you're basically starting your life over, right? And you're starting this new way of living, and you're hanging out with people that have started their new way of living. So these are just steps and suggestions that will help you start to gain a grasp and understanding of your financial picture at that point.
So I'm curious, because I grew up in Baltimore, right? And my idea was, you can walk to work. Like, there's 48 different places within 5 minutes I can walk to. How many
buses accessible?
Right, the
public
buses.
transportation.
I was walking. Fuck that bus.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there was options for getting around without a car, and it's interesting that you mentioned that like the car is not the most important, because I look at life out here in Cecil County and I'm like, well, Christ, you're not working if you don't have a car.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think that your circumstances will dictate that.
Right.
But I've just seen it time and time again where I see young people come into the program and they're just focused on that car. That car is the thing that they need, and then it'll be okay, and then life will be better. And they end up just going down Route 40 and going to Baltimore and just starting all over again and reinventing that wheel. And that is why my suggestion to not get a car right away is the way that I validate it, is because I just see it over and over, and once you get that little thought in your mind, you can't get it out. And
so no car is like removing access to the ease of drugs in your mind. Okay.
It does.
What about people who money's such a big trigger for? How do they help themselves with that?
So that's difficult, because I know a lot of people too where you have money in your pocket, it's just burning a hole.
Well, I can tell you what I do is you get a wife, and then you just let her control all the money. And then for years I tried to do it, and then I was like, no, why don't you just do this and I'll just get an allowance.
Yeah.
And that works better. I'm
There you
not
go.
good with
Get
money.
away.
But you know what? That's a really good point, Billy. I mean, if you're in a situation where, I don't know, say your parents take you back in, or someone else does that you trust, give them your money. You know, let them put it into the bank accounts. Let them give you an allowance. You know, sign an agreement if you want to. Whatever validates it for you. That, hey, I'm going to give you my check. You're going to pay my bills, and you're going to give me my allowance for the week or two. And when it's gone, it's gone. And what that does too is that'll hopefully will reinforce in your mind that I've got this amount of money to spend. So what do I want to spend it on each week? You know, do I want to just, let it burn a hole in my pocket? Do I want to go get like a PS5 right away? Is that my main goal? And buy video games? Well, that's great. But you know what? You buy that PS5, you're out of money for like 2 months, man. You know? And
with that, like, so that was my thing is, you know, we'd be doing okay. I'd pay the bills. We'd have a little bit of extra money. And in my head, it's like, oh, yeah, a new softball bat and glove sounds like a great idea. I can drop $300 on that. And it sounds good in my head because it's important to me. But now what I find is when I have to go ask her about it before I spend that money, you know, it's like, it's just like anything with addicts. Like, my best thinking gets me into trouble all the time. And I don't go into most situations thinking, I'm going to just fuck my whole life up right now with this decision. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm going to do it anyway. It's like I go into it with the best intentions and just some blinders or some naive, you know, thinking that gets me into trouble.
yeah. And that's a great point too. I mean, so ask your sponsor, run it by him. Be like, hey,
Yeah, having that accountable person.
Yeah, I want to buy a PS5. I'm 40 years old. I can't make ends meet. Is that a good idea?
Right.
I can't get my sponsees to ask me about serious stuff, much less their money.
So, I mean, that's one of the things, though. Like, money is pretty serious. I mean, as we kind of touched on before this, and I just, before we got into this podcast, did a little bit of looking into it. And, I mean, I think the American Psychiatric Association said that 75% of families consider money a stressor. So you figure, you know, if you had addicts, I know that number's got to be higher for most addicts. It's probably got to be close to 99% of addicts are not financially stable people. So that creates a huge amount of stress and a huge amount of worry and problem that, you know, it's hard to face sometimes.
But as you know, as we're talking about this, is it a stressor because 95% of addicts don't know how to manage their money,
Right.
and just don't know how to handle it? They see it as, you know, their ticket to the candy store and their ticket back to Baltimore or whatever it is, you know, as opposed to, hey, this is like a means for me to live and a means for me to improve my life and slowly see things get better. So money in general, I think it's a lot like an investment. Okay. So investments take time to compound. Okay. You could put away 10 grand a year for 5 years and be like, you know what? Great. I got 55,000 at the end of those 5 years. You know, I've made 10% in 5 years. That kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But hey, first of all, it's better than a savings account where you get 0.01%. Okay.
Right.
You can't even beat inflation, but it's time in the markets. It's time in investments. That is where the magic works. That's where the compounding happens. So, you know, 5 years doesn't look that great, but you know what? 10 years looks a whole lot better. 15 years, way better. 20 years, amazing. Compounding is just, you know, they call it like the eighth wonder of the world. Some people do, you know, it's mathematically, it's just, it's a great concept and it works. But I guess where I was going with this is, you know, if you have that money, that is your means to start slow. And that's my point is, you know, compounding doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a long period of time. Whereas, you know, building your life back happens over a long period of time. You know, if you're starting over again at 25, 26, you need to have an expectation that, yeah, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get a place to live. I'm going to work a program, and slowly things get better day by day, not instantaneously.
Instant gratification, man.
Yeah. And
Instant gratification is just, it's a myth. It's what we love as addicts. Absolutely. But that doesn't happen in the financial world unless you pick, I mean, okay. So even if you picked out Amazon, right, as a stock, you would have waited 25 years to get that big bang that we're having right now, you know, and you would have seen it going down and up and down. But that is where patience and time come into factor.
isn't some of it just luck? I mean, educated luck, but still, it's like gambling.
Well, so yes and no. Basically, if you want to go to the investment side of things, you know, there's luck involved in the sense that, you know what, the company is going to keep earning more and more money. But there are different ways to evaluate a company and see whether or not, hey, is this company financially sound? Are they meeting all their debt obligations? Do they have all this extra cash coming in? When you see that picture, that's when you say, you know what, I can put an educated guess and an educated bet on that investment that it's going to pay off and it's going to get better over time. If you look at a company, and this is where a lot of people are getting caught up today, okay? So you've heard about Zoom and you've heard about, I don't know, Snowflake, you know, these companies that just took off during the pandemic, like they were nothing stocks. Now they're $500-$600. Or look at Tesla, right? Those companies don't have financially sound balance sheets. Okay. Right. They benefited from having a technology that facilitated the state of the economy at that point. You know, the economies were shut down. How do companies continue to do business? Well, hey, Zoom was there for that's an answer. However, it didn't have all these cash flows and they just grew exponentially. Okay. So that doesn't happen all the time. And you just need to be aware of that.
Well, that's what I mean by the luck. Like that just was a consequence of a pandemic that had nothing to do with.
Yeah. Pandemics happen, every 100, 120 years. I mean, so our chances of seeing another pandemic are really slim, right? As we come out of this one. So what you look for is more of a company that is always, you know, they're growing, they're putting new products out there, they've got huge amounts of cash flow, they meet their debt obligations, and they continue to grow slowly. As an addict, a lot of us consume tobacco. You know, tobacco companies pay huge dividends, and they are continually changing their product mix and changing their products to better society, actually, which is surprising. But they're increasing their cash flows, they're paying down their debt, and you keep getting more and more in dividends every year. They raise that dividend. And what a dividend is just cash in your pocket. If you own that stock, they pay you to own the stock. So
I think that gets back to why, I mean, at least for me, like it's better to have smart people that know about money deal with my money than me doing what's the E-Trade and all that other crap. Because, and not that people can't do that and you can't spend a bunch, if you got free time to sit around and investigate and learn. But if you'd asked me, I'd have thought cigarette companies have got to be going down. Like, how could anybody want to still invest in a cigarette company? Like, people need to stop smoking.
Even after you watch me every week?
See, but that's the thing, though. That's why it pays to investigate, is because that is the common misconception that is out there about tobacco companies. Philip Morris is a huge international tobacco company, and their focus in the next 10 years, they're Marlboro. Okay, so they're international Marlboro. Their focus in the next 10 years is to do completely away with combustible cigarettes and go to, I forget, IQOS, I think is their product. And that is their goal, is to make society healthier by not having combustible cigarettes in society anymore. And it's taken off,
but still keeping you addicted to the nicotine.
Still keeping you addicted to the nicotine and their products, but on a healthier level. So it's paying off in Europe right now, and they've got a huge market in Japan and Asia as well. And I mean, that's the thing. Again, when you look at a company, can they adapt to changing environments? Yeah, you know what? 10 years ago, cigarette companies, they looked like, wow, there's all these health concerns, and you know, people are really ceasing on smoking, and you know, they looked like they were ready to die, but they adapted, changed their way in the markets, and here they are roaring back again.
I'm a little bitter about this one. I feel like they also got their hands in some legislative pockets
that
are fucking over all the other companies that are trying to.
If you look at that, they've had legislative issues for 30 or 40 years. So that landscape is nothing new to them. They know how to navigate it. They got people in Washington. I mean, and that's up to you as an investor. That is your choice whether or not you choose to invest in a company that has that type of product. You know, that they refer to it as ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And basically, my point of view is, if I buy stock in, say, Philip Morris or Altria, I'm buying stock from someone else that already bought that stock. All I'm doing is buying stock that's paying me a very healthy dividend, and that is growing that dividend every single year. So I take that money, I reinvest it, and we talked about compounding. All that reinvestment if you just put down $5,000 and you put in, let's say you get 100 shares of Altria out of that, well, you're getting $386 a year in dividends per share. That's $386. You reinvest that, that's going to buy you what we'll call it about seven and a half shares your next year. You reinvest that on top of the 386 and it just starts compounding. Again, it's really slow in the beginning. It's slow for the first 5 years. 10, 12, 13 years later, you're going to, double your share count. Now you've got 200 shares and you're getting 786 plus whatever they increase that dividend to each year. 386 one year, 394 the next, 402 the next. And it just keeps going up. And that's where the miracle of compounding happens.
So I could buy their stock and then the dividends could pay for the travel for me to drive to Delaware because of their stupid fucking rules that don't let me buy these in Maryland.
Absolutely. It really could. You
Fuckers.
you have two different choices with your dividend. Well, you have multiple choices with your dividends. You could just take them and reinvest them as I am because I'm planning for my retirement. And I figure as that compounds for 20 years, then I'm going to have a nice little nest egg that's A, paying me well over $2,000 or $3,000 alone from that one stock, and B, that price appreciation as well on top of that, and C, the compounding, just the number of shares that have grown. I'm going to have the benefit of that. But you could also just take those dividends and put them into a savings account. You get paid quarterly, so you get 4 checks coming in each year. And you could certainly use it to pay for your gas, pay for your habit as well, right? If you budget it out. So, yeah.
So I find all that fascinating. I don't want to buy their stock because I want them to fail because they're fucking me over. Those bastards.
And I'm certainly not trying to sell tobacco stocks. That's a personal decision. But the same concept exists with oil stocks because they're big dividend payers as well.
Right.
It exists with any stock that pays a dividend, really.
Going back to a couple things that were said, I found kind of interesting. One, you had brought up, and I don't know that we need to talk a lot about this, but you brought up like the idea of it is healthy if you don't feel in control of your money to allow someone close to you to do that. And the first thing I thought of was how many of us or people like us that came from traumatic backgrounds really have somebody they trust to hold their money. Like,
Sure.
Well, and not just that, but the, I don't know, perception in the media that like bankers and sort of, not specifically you, but like people like you are just taking
definitely just people.
my working money and,
Yeah.
and making yourself rich, and it's like that's
So-
a theme.
That I know that's really big. That's
Being
a
pushed
huge
right now.
theme out there. But I mean, I would advocate for a financial advisor, and that's exactly what you're talking about. And you know what? So
Right, whether that's a family person or a
Yeah,
professional
or a
person or
professional.
just someone that you know.
and you know what? There are fees involved, absolutely, but you're paying for a service, right? So do you want to turn around and just do work for your friends for free all the time? I mean, that is the business of it, and generally speaking, that financial advisors overall, they're called fiduciaries, and what that means.
Douchier.
Yeah.
It's got douche right in there.
So a fiduciary, their responsibility is you first, okay? Your best interests are what they have to act on, and if they don't, then they are breaking their fiduciary responsibility, and they're held liable for that as well. So basically, financial advisors, I think, are worth the money if you find one that's a good one or someone that you know. They do have your best financial interest in mind. So that would be another option if you don't have anyone close to you that could help you manage your money to start.
Not to be too social worky here, but like thinking grand scheme,
Yeah.
big picture, right? I buy these stocks in Philip Morris, who's selling somewhat a healthier version of death
Yes.
now, right? Look, I vape. I'm not criticizing, whatever. Altruistically, I'm giving them money to back them to be able to make more money for them.
No, that's a common misconception. Okay.
Okay.
So here's how it works. Okay, that could be the case, but it's also very likely that's not. The only reason that could be the case is if Philip Morris decides to issue more stock on what they call a secondary offering. And if you participate in that issuing directly at the correct time, then you will be buying shares of that stock directly from Philip Morris,
Right.
and they will be using your cash. Generally, what happens, though, is if you just go out to, say, an E-Trade account and you say, I'm going to buy 50 shares of Philip Morris, You're buying it from someone else that's selling it.
Okay.
So your money your money goes into that person's pocket.
Not Philip Morris.
Philip Morris
right.
never sees a dime of it ever, and
Okay.
they pay you to have that stock. So that's and I'm using Philip Morris as an example because they're known as a really good dividend stocks, and they happen to be in tobacco, which a lot of us love. So I'm not trying to sell it by any means.
No,
I just want
no.
to reiterate that. But that is a common misconception that if you buy a stock for a company, then you're backing that company.
Well, I'm
Well,
hoping
what
they
it-
do well.
Yeah, I mean, what it
Supporting
makes
them.
you technically, what it makes you is an owner of that company,
Cheerleader.
right? So you own shares of that company, and that means that if that company were to go bankrupt, you'd be very last in line to get anything left of that company. But yeah, if you buy a stock, you're really not financially supporting that company.
Okay, but I'm cheering them on, right?
Yeah,
and
'cause you want them to do better, and you want more money from them.
right,
Absolutely.
And I do know that from a world concept, like generally the people that struggle with nicotine habits are the lower socioeconomic people. So now every time I get that check, there's a part of me that's got to think, I'm benefiting from fucking over poor people. Like there's a altruistic.
Well, I mean,
part
but
to
are
that.
you really fucking over poor people? I mean, they are addicted to the nicotine. That's correct. Now we're getting to a philosophical,
Yeah,
definitely.
right? So yes, you are benefiting from them paying for that product. That's absolutely true.
I want
right?
to buy stocks in my crack dealer.
Yeah, I mean, so philosophically speaking, yeah.
he's gonna go public.
He's big time, man.
Yeah,
He had big rocks.
IPO next week.
Right.
This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause. So, when I first got clean, like most people, I was thousands of dollars in debt. I had my parents owned a business, and so I was raised in a middle-class family. I had some concepts of investing money and stuff, but I was in my early 20s, and I was thousands of dollars in debt, and I got a decent job, and then, they had some things like a retirement plan, and there was a guy there that basically, I would say, was the fiduciary for the
Douche.
company that I got, I guess I would say, for free, that would come in and give us some advice.
Sure.
Is it better to go look for someone on your own, like your own personal advisor, or is someone offered through an employer or one of those type things just as, I don't say just as good, I know that's a relative term,
Yeah.
but
So now that's a good question, and that brings up a number of topics. Okay, so one of the benefits of your 401k is when you get into tax planning. Okay, so when you contribute to your 401k, that becomes pre-tax. That's a pre-tax contribution. What that means is if you make $10,000 a year and you're putting $2,000 into your 401k, your taxes are only going to be for that year, you're going to be taxed on that $8,000, not the $10,000.
Right.
Okay, you pay taxes on your 401k as you withdraw it during retirement, so that reduces your tax burden every year, which is generally a benefit for everyone I could possibly think of. The next benefit to a 401k is we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand, is whether or not your employer does a match. Okay. If they do a match, what you want to make sure you're doing is you're contributing enough to obtain that match, because you're basically getting free money. Your employer is now giving you money towards your retirement. After that, it's going to become more of a tax balancing situation. You can put more money into your 401k if you want to. You can put up to $19,500 a year, and that just reduces that tax burden that much, and you pay for it later on in life.
After they've upped taxes.
Yeah. So that's a gamble. And that's a really good point, though, is, a question you have to start asking yourself at some point, and generally not when you're starting out, when you get to a later part of your life, is, how are my investments doing? Am I a rock star and I've got a ton of money? And when that money starts coming out, is that going to be more than what I'm making right now? So in that regard, your taxes could go up, right? Mm-hmm. So that means, is it more beneficial for me to put less away into that investment vehicle pay taxes on my money now that I'm putting away so that I don't pay taxes on it later on in life. And then you're gambling. The taxes that I pay today, are they less than what they're going to be in the future, or are they more than what they're going to be in the future? And that's a question that no one can really answer, and that's going to have to be with some judgment. And then again, hey, am I going to be pulling $200,000 out of my retirement account every single year in the future versus the 120 or the 90 or the 80 that I'm making today? And that's a judgment call. So to further answer your question, after you decide what that judgment call is, then yes, you can either, go open your own brokerage accounts. You can put them into an IRA, which is another tax efficient vehicle, or tax beneficiary vehicle, or you can put them into a Roth IRA. The benefit of a Roth IRA is that you're putting taxed money into it. So all that compounding that we're talking about with Philip Morris, all the dividends, all that kind of stuff, you never pay another dime in taxes on it when you take it out. For a traditional IRA, it gets taxed when you take it out, and you have required minimum distributions, meaning after you're 70 and a half years old, you have to take out 4% of it a year, or whatever the amount is that's dictated at that time. So
is a simple IRA the same as a traditional,
it's a traditional
IRA?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I think that's what we have now. It's a simple IRA.
The benefit to it is that it grows over time without you paying the taxes until you take the money out, but you do get taxed in the end. The only problem with the Roth IRA, and it's generally not a problem, is that there are there's a cap on how much you make each year, and if you make over such and such amount, then you can't directly contribute to a Roth IRA. You'd have to go the traditional route and then pay the taxes later on.
What do companies get out of matching that 401k?
They get employee retention.
Really, that's it?
It's like health benefits.
Yeah.
It's just something that you offer to try to get better employees.
Yeah, and they probably, I would imagine that, I don't know for certain, I haven't studied it, they may get tax breaks on it too.
Yeah,
as well.
There's got to be something.
But so a lot of it is, employee retention is a big thing for companies. And, employees that generally want to do well and are planning for their finances would want to stay at a place that gives them a very healthy contribution and match to
and
their
for
401k.
My wife, the reason it's come up for Voices of Hope is just the altruistic version. She wants to invest in these people and have them living healthy financial lot, you know what I mean, and trying to teach them and give them opportunity to.
I don't see that in many companies. Like, okay, here, I'll buy that, sure, but a lot of places, I
probably smaller, privately
things.
owned companies more than your big giant corporations.
You brought up the gambling thing earlier, and that kind of like the similarities to gambling, and that kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess like stock market stuff. Like I've never thought of that, but a lot of people with our kind of problem do have some gambling stuff. I don't personally.
Well, that's where I think the online investing gets a little crazy, the day trading and
the Dogecoin.
And that's the thing, because you get that rush out of it, right? Yeah. You buy Zoom at 50 and you actually sit on it for a month, from May until June or July last year, and you're at, $200. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing, But again, that's also, I think gambling along with investments is kind of like your day trading that Billy brought up. And it's kind of like people just, they buy something, they see it go up, they sell it right away, and it feels good to make more money. It feels good to have that money in your pocket. But that's also a short-term gain where you get taxed the crap out of it versus a long-term if you sit on it for a year. So, it's back to that word discipline.
So one of the things I kind of thought of in coming into this, like we come in here, we talked about the debt. A lot of us have not healthy models of what to do, right? Like we don't realize this. We think we leave our childhood home and we're just like, oh, now I can do what makes sense to me, right? But the truth is we learned 2 + 2 was 4 in like first grade, and that's what we know now. And it's the same for what our parents modeled for us. If our parents were unhealthy spenders or didn't have good finances, that's exactly our normal like reserve behavior to take into the world. And so
that's not mine. I just got to defend my parents a little bit. So.
Well, there you go. So we're fighting that. We don't have the concept of budgeting because it wasn't taught to us. People always bitch, that's not what's taught in school. We don't learn how to do taxes. It would suck if we did anyway.
Absolutely.
Everything we got went to drugs, basically. At least
Yep.
if you were a person like me. I know some people who did other stuff and were, I guess, manageable or whatever. I was like, I got $9. Do I get a Twinkie? Nope, no Twinkie. I'll steal a Twinkie. I'm gonna go get high with this $9.
Well, and
right?
I will say, in fairness, I was somewhat manageable in my
Okay, that's
using,
fair.
but not terrible.
Well,
I mean, not great.
And then we have, on top of that, a lot of people have criminal records, right? Which
Sure.
I don't know specifically that there's any like rules or laws around, hey, if you have a criminal record, you can't invest in a Roth IRA or something. But
Right.
they do keep us from living certain places. They keep us from getting certain type of jobs. So we're working with a smaller amount of money or a limited capacity already. How do we fight that
So,
against us?
You're unlocking. I guess my timing is impeccable. That's what I recently started reading a book. It's free online. It's a PDF, and it was written back in the mid '90s, and it's called The Millionaire Next Door. And what it points out is there's a huge misconception of what a millionaire looks like. All right, so there's lots of them throughout the United States, hundreds of thousands or whatnot. However, most millionaires today have come from nothing.
Right.
They've had nothing. They had no backing from their parents. They never got an inheritance. They did it all on their own. A lot of them don't work these high finance jobs or lawyer jobs. Lawyers, there's this mindset of, keeping up with the Joneses. That's a lot of like a lawyer's compares himself to another one. He's like, oh, I got to have this, I got to have that. Well, he has all this nice stuff. He looks like he's doing great, but he's got nothing to fall back on.
Right.
Your millionaire next door could be a construction worker. He could own an auto dealership, a used car dealership. He lives in a small house in a blue-collar neighborhood. But the thing that they have in common is that, they decided that they were going to focus more on saving than spending. So more saving and less consumption overall. And to your point of, you weren't brought up that way. Well, that is a behavioral mindset that can hopefully be changed with education.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we're talking about here is how do we bring in, financial planning to people that are in recovery houses stuff. Well, that's the education that we're hoping will help change the behavioral aspects of us always wanting to spend that money and having it burn a hole in our pocket. Those are all behavioral attributes that can hopefully be changed with education. How
many of the millionaires next door are in 12-step programs?
I don't know that they actually interviewed anyone.
6. 500,000 millionaires next door and 6. 6 are addicts. Yeah. Makes total sense. I'd believe that, actually. So do we need to legislatively fund some kind of like starter sobriety 12-step program, right? Or maybe there's like a year of training. Maybe there is behavior modification training. Maybe there is educational and finances and stuff we don't normally think about. How to get insurance, how to navigate the world of like insurance claims and like all this shit that we don't have. Would it be, I feel like I read all these articles that are like, hey, if we invested $1 million in pre-healthcare, we'd save $8 billion on the back end. Like, would that save us a lot of money as a society to invest in some kind of, not just financial planning, but like overall, like education for people newly in recovery?
I mean, I think absolutely, but I'm in recovery, so I'm supporting that. I think that there's still, unfortunately, a huge stigma out there against the recovery community. And people. From what I see, a lot of people that are not in our programs, they view the addict as that addict on the street. It doesn't matter if they're in recovery or not; they're just that addict,
Right.
And they could use a 12-step program, and they could use behavioral modification, and they could use behavioral education to enlighten them that there is life after those really tough times that a lot of us go through.
I mean, you talk about stigma and not to like point the finger at you, but like that's why we're not doing video with you today.
Yes.
And you're a handsome fella. It's not like you're just in here and ugly and that's why we don't have you on, right?
Yep.
Like there's still a stigma and there's still concerns. How will this affect my job and my career and my life, unfortunately?
And you're not wrong at all.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It sucks.
Yeah. And I'm aware of that stigma, which is why I'm trying to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I said. I couldn't blame you.
Yeah.
So let's say, what would your advice be for like the young guy comes in, he's in a recovery house, thousands of dollars in debt. He's got his $15 an hour job Amazon warehouse. I mean, where should he start? Should he start trying to pay off the debt? Should he start trying to save? Should he start, what would your advice to be to somebody coming in?
So again, my
get their feet?
advice for step one always is to put together a budget. Okay. Just write it down on a piece of paper, keep it in a notebook that you're writing, other notes in or whatnot, but just have that budget and just visualize it and just say, all right, I have this money coming in. What am I going to do with it? Well, I think there's a lot of options. You have debt obligations. If you can afford to pay some debt, make a small debt payment each month. Commit to $50 a month on something if you can work out a payment program with whomever your lender is.
You don't have to do that till you work step 9, though. That's when you start doing those amends.
You can do that, but I think that to start, you want to get the budget, you want to get some savings, and again, like I said, I'll reiterate, when you're starting out, you're not going to save up 6 to 9 months of savings before you're able to get out on your own. But get that budget, get a roof over your head, get the job that pays you that money, and get a steady paycheck, get a job that's steady. I mean, waiting tables, I know several people, like waited tables and stuff. And the problem with that, I used to be a waiter. The problem with it is that it's not always steady money. Mm-hmm. And especially you go through a pandemic. I mean, how many people lost their jobs, right? But you don't know on a given night, how much money do I have coming in? The benefit of having a steady job of any sort is that you have that weekly paycheck. And if you work overtime, you just have the benefit of more money coming in. But you can at least count on a minimum amount every week where you can put together a budget that, will work for you, or work with someone to put together a budget that will. And then, start making small debt payments, save your money for your rent, buy your food. I read this advice the other day that I thought was really great is, if you're really trying to save money and make it, we all want to go out. We want to go out to dinner. We want to go out to dinner after meetings. We want to meet up for coffee and stuff. If you can't afford it, but you feel obligated, then make alternate plans. Be like, hey, dinner sounds great, but I just can't do it. Why don't we meet up for a cup of coffee afterwards? Or tell me where you're going to get coffee afterwards and I'll meet you there instead. Or, hey, can we do, brunch on a Saturday morning where it's instead of a $20 dinner, you're looking at like a $10 brunch, Try to do alternate plans, but still have that social engagement that, makes you feel like you're engaged with your with your friends.
I've noticed if you just say, I don't have the money or I can't afford it, usually the guy that's not so good with money will offer to pay for you.
Yeah, that as well. Hey, you know what?
The people pleaser will waste his finances.
It's hot outside. Go meet for a snowball. Yeah. I mean, I took my son out for a snowball yesterday. It was like $3 for each of us. So,
You've mentioned savings a few times, right? Mm-hmm. And I obviously retirement planning, I'm not trying to belittle the fact that these are things that are needed. Savings accounts, completely useful. I can't tell you how many people don't budget at all. I think it's a very high percentage of our population. But I did take an economics class at one point, and I remember the teacher saying the entire purpose of money is to be spent. Like, it's useless if it doesn't get spent, if it just sits. And he wasn't saying don't plan for retirement, but what do you think about that statement too?
So that is more on an economic level when you talk about GDP and you talk about exchanges between countries. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's totally applicable in the sense of an individual, because you need to have savings. You need to have a rainy day fund at some point in your life. I mean, everything be going great. A recession hits, you lose your job, and then you can't find another one because no one's hiring. Unemployment benefits are going to be tight. They may not pay for all your bills every month. You're going to have some sort of savings to fall back on.
Are you a Christian?
I am a Christian.
Oh, okay, because there was that whole thing with Jesus and the money in the Bible where he was like, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That was Jesus' advice too, was to get rid of it.
So you brought up something that I heard one time, and it sounded like good advice, so I'll ask it. I had heard at one point that if you have credit card debt, whatever money you have in savings, you should just try to pay off your credit cards and use your credit cards as a rainy day fund versus having thousands of dollars sitting in savings, but then having thousands of dollars of credit card debt because you're paying higher interest on the credit card debt than you're getting in return for the savings.
So that's a slippery slope. It'd be great if we had no credit card debt in the world. I completely agree. Or as an individual, not having credit card debt would be a huge debt relief burden. However, the only problem with that is if you blow your entire savings on your credit card, trying to pay off your credit card, and then if things were to happen and you live on your credit card, if you don't have any money at the end of the month to make your minimum payment on your credit card, then you get late fees. Your credit starts going to shit. And then your interest rates on your credit cards go way up. And that all just starts piling up very quickly. You know, a credit card payment at called 8% versus one at 26% because you missed 2 payments in a row. That's a very different credit card payment.
Right.
You know? So my suggestion would be, sure, use some of your savings, but make sure that you have enough to get through a month or two, at least if things get bad, and don't spend it all on your credit card. Certainly try to pay it down and make those payments or make additional payments, but try to keep some rainy day fund if you can.
And this was advice coming from trying to get out of credit card debt, not trying to maintain credit card debt, but trying to get out of credit card debt.
And I've read a lot of advice, and they call it like the snowballing effect. I forget the guy's name. He's interesting. You know, tackling all your debt at once and then you start saving. Well, I think that advice is.
You gotta have discipline to do that. You gotta be really disciplined.
But you could still make payments towards your debt, and you can make additional payments and still have some savings, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. You know, you just don't know when that payment is going to turn off. So that payment being your salary, you know, you lose a job, your wife loses a job, and the amount of income you have coming in each month, you don't know if that's going to cut in half or not. So you've got to plan ahead.
And there's times when the credit card won't be able to be used in the future, depending on these circumstances that we can't predict, whereas that money that you supposedly have in savings will be accessible and be able to use no matter what, right? And so that, I think, kind of puts you in a scary situation too. I think what you're saying is, if I'm paying 8% in credit card debt, but I'm only getting 1% a month in interest in the bank,
I got $10,000 sitting in the bank.
Yeah, but the moment that you spend that $10,000 on that credit card debt, and if it doesn't pay it off, then now you still have credit card debt and you don't have anything sitting in the bank.
So I don't know if you've ever heard of the program Debtors Anonymous. It's like a 12-step program for financial ideals. It's a pretty interesting program. I went a few times. One of the first things I heard that really struck me was they said somebody identified, because we say, "Oh, I'm Jason, I'm an addict" in our meetings, right? Yeah. In these meetings, everybody kind of has their own thing that they say. It's a little interesting. And one person said, "I'm so-and-so and I'm vague about money." And that's like one of their big ideals. And it struck me and just like hit my nerve. I was like, I am the vaguest motherfucker about money. Like I make some, I spend some, I have no, and their idea is like, you need to be on top of all of this, right? The more you know, the better. You should know to the penny what's in your account at all times. Like this should be obvious to you. And you should probably have a really good idea if there's investment stuff. I don't think most people go in there have investment stuff, but you should know what's where, how much it is, and not be clueless about it, right? Yep. And I just thought that was an interesting idea, because I am vague about money. Like I don't budget so much, and more recently I've gotten a little better with this. We have a basic budget. I have an allowance, so I know like this is what I get to spend per month on whatever the hell I want. I think it's hard to fight those frivolous urges sometimes, right? Like, because buying shit feels good. It's a lot like the drugs. Gambling feels good. Buying shit feels good. It fills that void for a while. But another concept they have in those programs is the idea of some people are under earners and some people are overspenders, right? And you have to differentiate first to figure out which course of work you need to do on yourself. But I think a lot of our population struggles with the under earning, right? Like we come in, we have very low self-esteem, most of us, and we think like, I'm not worth going after these better paying jobs, or I'll never get that because I have this 10-year gap in my work history. And how I think a lot of the struggle we have is that, hey, I can write out this budget as many times as I want, and every time it says I'm coming up $700 short a month to be able to afford life. So what the fuck do we do with that, man?
So that's tough, right? And that's a tough situation to be in. But again, I think that that's going to be more of these little steps that you have to take, okay? If you're just starting out and you're not making great money and you have low self-esteem, well, get that first job and just work it. And, if you start getting raises and things along the way, that's going to make you feel better about your work ethic. It's going to help you start to feel like, you are worth more. You may not be able to save a dime to start with. All of your money might go to your expenses. You may not be able to pay any debt back right away. And that's fine. I hate to say, if you've been in debt for years, well, what's one more year at that point, right? So you have to just work at it day in and day out, and just take it slow to begin with. And if you can't afford the place where you're living, then try to find a place that's cheaper. And yeah, it may not be your ideal place to live, but if you're able to survive there and you're able to cut back on expenses just to start, then you can move into a nicer place in the future when your income comes up and starts growing a little bit. But again, it's a lot of patience, and it's a lot of discipline. And you should also, I think, put your priorities too. You need food. You need to have a place to live at some point. These are not wants. I mean, we can't live without food, and you can't live without shelter, right? So then look at, do I need to have a $200 a month cable bill? No, you don't need cable at all, right?
Do people still do that? Is there still cable? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I have a cable bill.
We have cable too.
But with cable comes internet, right? So,
right. Yeah. I do have
that. I mean, internet is interesting because it's almost like it's a necessity these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything's connected, and I wouldn't fault you for having an internet bill. Nothing else.
So maybe with all these people that struggle when we get clean with overeating, we could just not eat for weeks at a time. Like, I'll just not eat this week. I'll save money and help my
and water. Depending where you live, water's free, and water will fill you up eventually, right? But I mean, so if you find yourself being really far in debt each month on your budget, then you're going to need to make some changes. And whether it is cutting back on food, do I need to go to the most high-end grocery store in town if I can get what I need to live and eat at the cheapest place in town and go there instead? Or, do I go, can I drive 10 minutes down the road to a lower income area and do my grocery shopping versus going to the most expensive place in the county to do my grocery shopping?
Or for me, it's packing a lunch, know? Do I pack my lunch and take it to work each day, or do I eat out all the time? And it's amazing how much money I will save. You know?
I mean, I like to go out to lunch once a week when I go to the office. And I mean, I spend $15, and that's on one meal.
Yeah.
And so if you multiply that by, say, 2 meals a day, what if you went out for lunch and dinner every day and you ate cheap? You're still spending $30 a day. It's $210 a week just by going out to eat.
I started taking my lunch to save money, and now it's like I am so fucking lazy. I'm not leaving work to go somewhere. That's a pain in the ass.
Right. And you know what? That's a behavioral modification.
Yeah, it's so much easier to bring a lunch.
There is a thing, though, that comes along with, like, what I fall into in trying to be disciplined, and as with most things in life. It's like, if I just try to stick to this rigid budget and save all the time, eventually I get to a point where I'm like, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. It's no fun. I can't even have a fucking cup of coffee. You know what I mean? Like, I can't spend $4 at Starbucks, you know, because I want to drink. Like,
but that's why you give yourself that cup of coffee. Yeah. And you cut yourself a break and say, all right, I spent $50 yesterday.
I'm an addict. One is too many and 1,000 never enough.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like dieting. You have your cheat days, right? And you know what? If you cheat and you fuck up and you're like, I'll get back on it tomorrow, and that's fine. I mean, it's
that's where I think people struggle is to get back on it tomorrow. I think we have this like failure mechanism or something where it's like, I'm off of it today, so now I'm just all out, and it's like we struggle with that. Dude, okay, it's a day.
Right.
You bought
I had one bad
today.
day. Let's
worries.
just get back on it. Yeah.
I've been better with that lately, and it's so much easier.
I've been trying that too.
Yeah.
I heard a thing one time. It was the 80-20 rule. It's like if you can do something 80% of the time, that's good
then
enough.
You're in good shape.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to the fiduciary idea. I love that.
I do too.
Are there services or fiduciary services out there that are free, or was like if you're not someone that can afford to go to, a professional, do banks offer those services? Are there places you can get at least some basic? Because I think of things like, setting up a budget. I don't know that most people would know how to accurately set up a budget.
I always forget shit in it.
Right. That's a
I mean,
great
how much
question.
do I spend on gas?
Yeah,
How
where's
much do
the
I spend
pro
on
bono-
car insurance? How
Where's
do
the
I
pro
factor
bono
in?
douches? I mean,
Right.
fiduciaries.
How do I factor in a monthly bill into my weekly budget? Because some weeks have 5. I mean, some months have 5 weeks.
So
You know,
then
stuff
what you
like
could
that.
do is multiply it by 52 for all the weeks in the year, divided by 12 for your monthly average.
Well, yeah,
Matter of
that's
averages.
easy for smart math people, but
Right,
for
right,
some
right.
people, they don't know how to
What about
balance a checking account. So
Yeah.
What about that part in your budget that's for the thing you don't predict, right? Like that's supposed to be part of your budget too.
The
Like, oh
rainy
yeah,
day.
that thing that's going to happen because there's always something that
Yeah,
happens.
car bills.
Car
happen,
bills,
man,
the-
you know?
doctors. Yeah.
The plumbing breaks, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what you can budget, but I try to put away some money each paycheck just for car bills, you know. And yeah, it sounds like, oh well, dude, if you put away 25 a paycheck, you know, that's not going to get you anything with a car. But that's true. But you know, cars don't break down every month. They don't break down every week.
Right.
They may break down every year. And at the end of that year, I've got $600 to do some engine repairs, and unfortunately, maybe put the rest on a credit card or whatnot. But you know, it's the little ideas, and it's the little amounts that add up to larger sums in the end, whether it's compounding or you're just saving in an envelope, you know?
But no pro bono financial expertise that you're aware of.
Well, so
feel like there
I
should
think
be.
that's
It
a
doesn't
great
even
question.
need to be expertise.
No,
I mean, some of it people just need basic
Yeah, and I
understandings
think-
of some of these.
Can we just all
principles.
call you, Pete? Can you just give out your number? And we'll all
Pete's
call
gonna
you
give
with
out
our
his cell
questions?
number.
The only thing I'm aware of, and I think that's a great question, I do know that I sometimes get emails from a couple of credit unions that I'm a member of. And they do have seminars, you know, maybe one night a month or every other month. You have to look for advertisements where they would give free counseling. You know, probably more like someone that you're speaking of someone with your 401k at your company, or they come in and talk to you about it. I think it's more along those lines. It's like an education session, but I believe that is available. And then I think I don't want to speak for bankers and, you know, that are in branches, but probably if you set up an appointment with them, you'd probably be able to go over some of this stuff as well.
Right. So maybe checking with your bank, checking with
Yeah.
your employer, seeing if they have a person that can help
You know,
you with that
employers,
stuff.
that's a
and
great
them coming in.
that's a great point. I think HR would probably have an idea of either A, who you could talk to, or they may have people that can help with that as well, depending on the company that you're working
Right. Because and like at our company, like the guy, and he's great. He's a nice guy. He's helped me over the years do different stuff. We set up college savings for the kids and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he also, like, it's in his benefit to get me to invest in things because he gets whatever
commission off of it.
commission.
Yeah.
But you know, I trust his advice, you
Yeah.
know, and try to follow what he says, and
Yep.
he doesn't charge me money for it, but he makes commission on it, so it's a win-win, hopefully.
And there's probably something to be said, and I'm sure you want to navigate these waters cautiously, but just asking some of the more senior members around the program, like some of these people might have established money routines, and if you talk to enough of them and ask them about what they do, you're going to run into some people that sound like they're somewhat educated, at least enough to help you
Yep.
start a budget and stuff like
Yep.
that. Like, and that, I think that's something members who've been around a while probably are willing to help you with if they
Yep.
know that's what you need. And I mean, nobody's ever asked me. I'm glad, because I'm probably not the person to ask about
Yeah,
financial
don't ask
stuff.
me.
I mean, that's
I
a
am
great
definitely
point.
not.
I've actually helped a couple of people in the program that have asked for help and setting up budgets and things over the years. And you know, my advice, I have two things that I think are pretty easy. And the first one's, you know, setting up a budget. It could be as basic as, I know I pay 7 bills a month. Let me write them out what they are. I know that I make this much in my money coming in each week with a paycheck. And then you know, that just gives you a little financial picture. The next step to that is something that I actually do this. I have a ton of savings accounts where I put money from each paycheck for different bills, but also on a more immediate basis, I also have, it's just called the envelope system. It's very basic. You know, you get 10 or 15 envelopes, whatever it needs to be, and you write that bill in each one, and each paycheck, you just put a portion of that bill in, and then at the end of the month, you have that money, you pay your bill. The next month, you start over again with your first paycheck. And you have to have the discipline not to go into those envelopes and steal that money from that bill. But, you know, if you don't have transportation, or you don't have a number of accounts and you don't want to, which is perfectly reasonable, you know, you can do something as easy as just setting up envelopes that you can just divide your money into.
It reminds me of a guy, Uzman, who did a lot of convention shares, and he talks about how Addict Man popped out and told him to open up one envelope where they were going to open up them all, but they opened them up all anyway.
Yep.
It was funny. So would you say that there's any difference between the financial suggestions somebody newly in recovery needs versus, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to think somebody same age bracket in their life because they've probably led a different life, have some different circumstances. But basically, for the teenager or the person entering adulthood and just starting with finances, are those two pretty similar, or is there a difference in there somewhere?
They are applicable to anyone of any age, pretty much. It's never too late to start a budget. It's never too late to start saving for retirement. It's better to start earlier than later, but it's never too late.
Are student loans worth it? I mean, a lot of us come in recovery, we want to get an education and do something different with our lives. How tough is that to navigate? Because student loans are exorbitant. I mean, I can tell you right now, my wife and I, between the two of us, have $250,000 in student loan debt.
Wow.
And I mean, I have a master's. She has a couple masters. I think 3 now, actually, which is kind of ridiculous. But right. But it's like, that's a house.
Yeah.
That's a fucking mortgage. And I don't think that's fair, but that's my own shit, right? I took it on, so I knew it. But what do you do with that?
So I think that education is a personal choice. And I do believe that education is necessary in today's world.
Right.
And I also think that an education is never a waste. You know, if you choose to spend the 50 to 100 grand or whatever it is for your master's degree, that education is never going to be wasted on you. And I think it's a worthwhile investment. I paid off my student loans years ago. But you know, I recall when I was paying them, and I'm sure I'd be willing to bet circumstances have not changed that much, that the payments are either minimal or they're negotiable. So that if you're having a hard time paying that payment, you call up the loan processor and you just renegotiate a lower payment each month and then extend it out, you know, further on so that you can make ends meet. And then as your financial picture changes, and if you start having more money coming in through your budget, then you can make additional payments or raise that payment. You know, and that's all due to personal circumstances, I think. But yeah, I think education is worthwhile. I think it's necessary. I think that the United States has fallen behind a lot of the Eastern European countries and even the European countries in education as well. And I think that in order to better American society, education is needed. Yeah.
They're coming up with some better avenues, too, for education without getting quite so into debt. My wife's doing a program now that's not near as expensive, and she was able to qualify for some sort of government grants.
Yeah, there's a lot of...
I forget what the name of it
Pell
is
Grant?
right now. Pell Grant,
Yeah.
to cover a lot of her costs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely worth looking into versus just going, signing up and paying all the money, you know, trying to talk to somebody about what grants and things are out there or what programs are there to help.
That, and schools also have numerous scholarships, like things that aren't advertised and maybe take unique circumstances. And
You got to write an essay.
You got to write an essay, sure. But, you know, I mean, you could, you know, try to pursue those as well.
Well, and from a personal standpoint, I think it's very different an adult who's in their late 20s, early 30s, or even a little later deciding to educate themselves versus a 17-year-old kid making a decision about what they want to do with the next 30 years of their life. I mean, at 17, your brain's not even fully developed, and you're signing that kid up for hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt because that's what they're supposed to do. Like, I think that's very different than an adult who probably is going to be more likely somebody coming into recovery that decides, hey, I think I want to go out and try to get an education to better my life now that I'm in recovery.
Nope, we're just like 17-year-olds.
I still see myself as 17 in my brain.
Right.
So.
We'll see what happens.
I'm like, fuck it, they'll cancel it or I'll die. Whatever. So one of the aspects of financial planning that I feel like is never talked about that I hear, and something that I did not live within for most of my life, and I'm just starting to more recently, is the idea of society is partly my responsibility, right? And all humanity, if we're not all doing well, I'm not doing well, right? So like this idea that, I guess it came from church a long time ago, the idea of tithing, right? I'll give 10% of my money to the church. I don't give it to church, but I have come to the realization that I lived a lot of my years saying, I believe in giving back to society and we should contribute and all this shit, and didn't actually live any of that, right? So I've chosen recently that 10% of my fucking income goes back to the community in some way, shape, or form. And we don't talk about that in financial health. And I guess from the standpoint of a professional, that might not really be sound advice, but to me, it's like that fills something else in my financial life, which is like a fulfillment aspect. And I guess somewhere I believe in this. If I take care of the universe, it'll take care of me too. Is that any part of your financial planning advice? Or?
Absolutely. But that's also more on a personal level. That's going to vary from individual to individual.
Yeah, what your
However, along the lines of giving back to society, that there are people that put into their plans that, upon my death, I want to give such and such amount to the university that I went to, or to this foundation that I believe in, or to, to this place that helped me out. I would love to give back to the center that I went to get the help that I needed. I would love to. I don't have the financial means right now, but that is something that is on my radar as well. But that is something that, if a financial advisor would help guide you towards savings towards that and working that into your budget, where you just say, well, I'm going to do, either do this on a monthly basis, maybe you're doing, or if my plan is, upon my death, I want to leave $200,000 or whatever it is. Well, that would just be part of the plan of how do we get there? What investments do we need, to build up that income to enable to leave it to them? So that is something that's very much in financial planning today.
And there's an interesting movement you can research called effective altruism, which gets more in line with the cigarette thing and you were talking about earlier. And it's like, how do we use our money to effectively further the growth of our society and our community? So it's pretty interesting. Something to look into. You
got any more questions for Pete?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, Pete, I really appreciate you coming on today, man. I think this was interesting. I hope it helps people. I know... I feel like there's so many aspects to the financial health and well-being of, people like us, members of 12-step programs, people just coming into recovery. I do think it's as simple as, hey, let's start with this budget, and that can work so many wonders, right? And from there, the ways you can go with that are exponential. I guess what I learned today is play the lottery and hope for the best. Spend all your paycheck on the lottery.
Budget is step one. Step one. We made a budget and
and we budgeted for the lottery.
Yeah. We're just going to play the Mega Millions every day and hope for the best. That's what I got.
All right. Well, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Billy. Yeah. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Stay safe out there, everybody. We'll see you next week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.